Everybody's got a story. You just have to listen. Hola, I'm Joe Pardavila, and this is Good Listen. And my guest today is fascinated by the sex lives of animals. Now, you may think, hey, is this going to be weird? Well, no, because Nathan Lents is a college professor who wrote the book, The Sexual Evolution. And yes, this conversation might be a little weird, but not like crazy, like dark side of the web weird. Nathan wrote this amazing book called The Sexual Evolution, which talks about the similarities of sex and gender that is between the animal kingdom and us humans. So it's gonna be a fun chat. We're gonna talk about how he became a college professor, why he decided to learn about this stuff, and how close to animals are we when it comes to sex. Nathan, welcome to Good Listen. How are you?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
Oh, you're very welcome. And I love having folks like you because, there's that adage of never be the smartest person in the room. Well, I always don't, I love being the dumbest person in the room. So I love having conversations with folks like you, like professors who write books. It's really cool. And so I want to start by talking about being a professor because the idea is very, look, very astute. Oh, look at that guy's a smart guy. But then you get to oh shit, that's really hard to be a professor, to climb that. People think, oh, you go to school, maybe get a couple other letters that go after your name, and then you become a professor. But man, from what I understand, that track is really hard, Nathan.
It is. It's very competitive. When you say hard, one thing to remember, you have to work really hard. You spend a lot of time, but we're doing our favorite thing all the time, or most of the time. That's what's great about being a scientist or a professor, where you really get to choose how you spend your day, how you spend your time. And so, yeah, I put in a lot of hours, but there's some days when I can't believe people pay me for this because I'm having so much fun. I'm having fun with students. I'm having fun in my lab. I'm having fun with these books. And it really is the best. I think it's the best job in the world, being a professor, because you're in a lot of control over how you spend your time. If you want to really go all in on teaching, you can do that. If you want to be all in on research, you can do that. If you want to go into administration, you can do that. It's kind of like it's almost like you run a small business, but you can't go bankrupt.
Good stuff. Good stuff. All right, let's dig into the book a little bit here. Homosexuality in nature.
Yeah.
We always joke when you see two male dogs playing that the one person's always gonna be, well, looks like you got yourself a gay dog there. And so tell me about that, the homosexuality in nature.
What's funny? The example that you just used is that so many people have thought that same-sex sexuality couldn't exist in nature because it had no point. But those same people saw their dog humping other dogs, and pillows and whatever else.
Right.
So it's like, I think you've kind of known that it's there. So it's funny because biology, until fairly recently, did think of homosexuality as a conundrum, as something that needed to be explained because it doesn't have any point to it. Well, first of all, as a heterosexual, I don't know if you are heterosexual or not, but I sure hope that that every time you have sex isn't for the purpose of making children, right?
Right. Yeah.
I mean,
Yes.
as the human species go, something like 0.05% of our sexual activity has anything to do with procreation. So let's
Right.
keep in mind that it's never been just about procreation, certainly for us. But what we're finding is that it's not just for procreation in animals either. Animals have sex with each other for a whole variety of reasons. Some of those are pro-social reasons, like social cohesion, cooperation, reconciliation, alliance building. It's one way to climb the ladder in a social structure, is to have sex with people. And they can also use it in more negative, dark ways. They can use it for domination. They can use it for deception. And so when you factor in all the various reasons, none of those have to do with procreation. Procreation's in there, but even pair bonding, sex strengthens a pair bond, right? We know that. You become much more attached to someone the more you have sex with them. But when we realize that in nature that you don't necessarily have to have a child in order to benefit from a attachment, and you consider all of these other benefits that comes to someone who can use sex as a social, component, then of course it would be weird if it was only directed at the opposite sex, because then you'd have all these things that you would potentially miss out on. One thing I say in the book is, it's kind of heterosexuality needs some explanation. The reason I say that is it's really one of the only sexual orientations that is mostly defined by what it's not, right? But by its aversions. Because if you say heterosexuality, oh, you're attracted to the opposite sex. Okay, but so are pansexuals and bisexuals, and even gay people will from time to time have had sex with the opposite sex. So it's not exclusive to heterosexuality. What's really exclusive to heterosexuality is a refusal to have sex with anyone of the same sex. And that really requires an explanation, because in most contexts with other animals anyway, that could only come with costs. There's nothing to be gained by having an aversion, right? And so what we see in nature, in pretty much every animal, well, let me make this qualifier, social animals. If you look at social animals and the way that they interact, what you actually see is something closer to bisexuality or pansexuality, meaning you don't really find that many individuals that are just completely averse to that and to same-sex sexual activity, we'll say. But you do see that in solitary animals. And that's what I think is interesting, is a solitary animal has no social use for sex. So for them, it really is just procreation. And of course, you don't see same-sex behavior in orangutans, for example, because as adults, they're almost purely solitary. They really don't have anything to do with each other. They're territorial, they're aggressive. And so, but they will have sex with females. I'm talking about males. They'll have sex with females for about 3 days during her fertile period. And he'll guard her jealously. He won't even sleep or let her sleep. He's really, doesn't want anybody. He wants to protect his paternity. And then once he's confident she's pregnant, he's gone. And that's it. He has nothing to do with the kid, nothing to do with his wife, but he won't have anything to do with any other males either. So to me, the difference between social animals and solitary animals is one of my favorite things to contrast, because it really shows you what about our social life, all the interesting things about our social life that come from that.
Interesting. Now, I joked about like, oh, look, the two boy dogs are playing. It must be gay. That's, obviously the joke that everyone's going to make in the dog park. But do they know that it's a same sex? Like, does the boy dog that's humping around with the boy, do they have any idea?
I don't think. I mean, they might have a different level of attraction. If a female in heat comes in the dog park, obviously they're gonna have no interest in anything else. That's gonna completely capture them. When growing up, when we had a dog that was in heat, males would come from miles away and try to dig under the garage because they could smell it, right? So obviously that takes precedent. But no, they don't think in these categorical ways like we do. I mean, culture has taught us, like, oh, this bucket is for girls, this bucket is for boys, and we behave this way if you're in that bucket. And animals don't give a shit about that. They don't have categories and labels and rules. Well, they do have rules, social rules. We can talk about that too. But in general, they don't have hangups. That hangups are a human problem. Now, I'm not saying that if we didn't have those hangups, everybody would be gay. That's what I'm saying. But I'm saying that our orientation and attraction takes shape in an environment. And in the environment that humans have built, it really pushed people towards that heterosexual orientation. So if you were naturally, genetically somewhere more in the middle, you kind of got pushed in this direction. And so those of us who are gay and identify as gay despite all of that, it was like, I mean, the culture really tried to make me straight. Everybody from my kindergarten teacher to my parents and aunts, and everyone wanted me to be straight, except me. I was like, oh, this is who I am, So there's obviously something inborn that rejected all of that culture. But animals don't give a shit about categories and labels and expectations and taboos. They don't have any place in that. And I like that you use the animals in the dog park, the dogs in the dog park, because dogs are descended from wolves. So we know a lot about dogs and wolf behavior by comparing them. And why would a male wolf, come to have sex with another male wolf? In their case, it's very dominance-oriented hierarchy. It probably is a contest, a competition, a fight for dominance. And it's much safer than fighting, because if you fight, there's injuries. Even if you win, you could be wounded, terribly. But if you have a wrestling match, essentially, and then both parties can walk away intact with a little bit of dopamine, connection, reconciliation, and respect for the alpha. The alpha won, and so he gets the top spot. And remember, in wolves, feeding privileges follow the dominance hierarchy. So you really want to be on top if you can, literally.
So animals are the original make love, not war. So they were just like, hey, that's so funny.
Some of them, some more than others, some more than others. So if you look at, for example, there's two species of chimpanzees, the common chimpanzee that everyone thinks of when you say chimpanzee, but there's another species that's much smaller in number because it's restricted to a small habitat, and they're called bonobos. You may have heard of those, or pygmy chimpanzees. So they're the complete opposite of common chimpanzees in a lot of their social life, in that they do have sex with each other rather than fighting in order to maintain things like dominance and feeding privileges and all of that. They are the most sexual species ever. They're constantly having sex with each other. And it's a lot of same sex, but also obviously opposite sex happens as well. It's female dominated society. And they figured out a better way, so to speak, rather than, because chimpanzees, common chimpanzees, are kind of nasty to each other. They can be aggressive and mean, and they bite each other, and that's kind of, they have this very male dominated aggressive structure. And it's not a lot of fun, I think, to be a chimpanzee unless you are lucky enough to be at the top. But if you're a bonobo, I mean, you're having sex all the time, many
Wow.
times a day with lots of different individuals. And they're still jockeying for power and privilege, and all of that, but it's generally resolved through sexual activity rather than by fighting. And I mean, that sounds pretty great to me.
Wow. And well, we talk about human meanness. Let's not give any chimps a Facebook account because, God, if they got on Facebook, who knows what the hell they're going to say if they're already mean to each other in real life.
They really are. And the thing is so many anthropologists over the years have looked at the common chimpanzee to explain why humans are violent and why we kill each other and why males dominate and all of that. Because you don't have to squint that hard to see the seeds of like warfare and all of that. But if we had looked more carefully at the bonobos and looked for human society there, I think we would have had hopefully a more kind of peaceful way to think about our society and different ways that it could be structured. We don't have to live like this. We've chosen to live like this. We don't have to live like this.
And speaking of living like this and the way society kind of forms how these relationship works, it's the monogamy, polygamy kind of conversation as well. Because as we all know, although there has been a huge shift, obviously. Actually, a friend of mine is an NYU professor, Dr. Jana Vrangalova. We did a podcast together years ago. So these sex studies, I'm kind of nerd out about them a little bit. But this idea that, there's been a shift in this culture where now open relationships are more prevalent. You're seeing a lot more people, even polygamy, like having multiple, husbands and wives. So in the animal world, you kind of hinted at it earlier that like, hey man, a lot of these like to party, so they're getting around. So, well, let's start there. Are there many monogamous animals?
Um, it's a great question because it depends on what you mean by monogamous. So there's two forms of monogamy that we talk about. Social monogamy, which is the tendency to form a pair, a breeding pair, or just a pair, a dyad, as we call it in biology. We call them dyads. That's fairly common. It's really common in birds. Birds pair up. Like 90% of migratory birds form dyads. Okay.
Wow.
So that's social monogamy, or sometimes called economic monogamy, because what it means is two individuals come together, they share territory, they defend it in common, they share food and other resources, they build a nest, they care for their offspring jointly. It's a real partnership. And so it's really, birds are the stars of that. Mammals, only about 9% of mammals form dyads. So you talk about dogs and wolves. Wolves do not form dyads. They form packs, but they don't form dyads. Lots of animals don't form dyads. Primates, which is we are in that group, it's a little more common. It's about 15% of mammals form dyads. All right. And then when you get into apes, really none of them do except us. Well, I'm sorry, that's not true. Some species of gibbons, which are the lesser apes, will form dyads. But that's social monogamy. The other kind of monogamy, the one that most people are really talking about, is sexual monogamy, which is where you're exclusive, sexual exclusivity within that. That is almost unheard of in the animal world. There are, and you can count them, 8 species of mammal that have been found to be sexually exclusive in their pair. Just 8. And there's something like 6,000 mammal species that have been described. So 8 out of 6,000. You do the math, it's about 0.15%. So sexual monogamy is extremely rare.
So 8 of those, can you give us like an example? Because some of those may be like, I've never heard of the animal in my life. What
You haven't heard of any of them, I would bet.
really? Okay.
Yeah. One of them is coppery TTs. They're the most famous one because their groups, you might want to say flocks or troops or whatever, are nuclear families where you have a male, a female, and their children, and that's the group. And that's really not unheard of anywhere. So they're sometimes called like the model of the human family. But it's not like this family and then can interact with that family. No, they're aggressive and territorial towards that family. That's the group, is just that family. So I don't think that's a good model for the human family.
What is that?
It's a small monkey. It's a New World monkey in South America.
Wow, very interesting. All right, I gotta ask, because you mentioned 90% of birds are monogamous, so 10% they're swingers? Are they going out there and partying? What are they doing?
It's 90% of migratory birds. So like in the tropical rainforest, they're not. A lot of birds live in colonies. And yes, they are swingers, so to speak. So they have nesting. And what's interesting is that when monogamy isn't there, um, it's much more where you see kind of deadbeat dads and not the kind of social structure that you think of with birds. Monogamy is a great equalizer. Certainly in mammals, but it really appears that way in birds too, because it ties the two creatures together. Their fate is connected in their offspring, their genetic legacy. And so they really want to work together. Monogamy is many ways an equalizer. And unfortunately, mammals have mostly abandoned monogamy, and that's why paternal investment in most mammals is very, very low. There it, Most mammal fathers are deadbeats. They get an individual pregnant and then they're gone. They don't care. But luckily, in our group, which is the apes, you see a lot of paternal investment, which is good because that's where we came from. And of course, in humans, it is undeniable, but paternal investment is very high. And so a lot of people have connected that to monogamy. I connect it to monogamy loosely. I think we have other structures that guarantee paternal investment. But I want to tell you about another monkey, since you're asking for examples, that is really fascinating to me. It's my favorite monkey is the Barbary macaque. So this is a monkey that lives in North Africa, and you can look them up, Barbary macaque. They have a lot of very unique features about them. But my favorite thing is that they do communal parenting, sometimes called allo parenting. So they're all in a big group. It's female, it's matriarchal. It's matriarchal in terms of mate choice. So the females choose sexual access, but they're all having sex with each other all the time anyway. Certainly with heterosexual relationships, the female chooses. But they do form dyads for short periods of time. But the children that they might care for in those dyads aren't going to be theirs necessarily genetically. So they kind
Interesting.
of raise the kids in this very kind of commune style where nobody really cares about whose kid is whose genetically. They're all kind of in it together. They're very, very communal. But what's fascinating is they still pair up sometimes. Like there's something about being bonded to another person and then caring for kids with that person where the relatedness doesn't matter. It's more just about the connection. I love that example because to me, that really is the model for the human family. And people are like, why? We're not promiscuous. We're monogamous. We don't do communal parenting. We absolutely do communal parenting because you send your kid to school, somebody else teaches them. You send them to daycare, they take care of them. You go to a restaurant, somebody else procures your food. When your child's sick, you go to the doctor. How many adults take care of your children besides you? You think it's just you because you house them, but we're all caring for each other's kids, and it's transactional, or there's payment involved in some cases or whatever. But to me, that's just a cultural smokescreen. What we're really doing is cooperating, right? That's what we're doing. We're cooperatively parent. It does take a village to raise kids. You don't do it on your own. Um, and I know now with like homeschooling or whatever else, it's kind of coming back into that. But again, still, you go to the doctor, you have play dates, you have babysitters. You really don't do it on your own, and you're paying somebody else for food at very least. So yeah. Anyway, I think the Barbary macaques are better.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. That's a super weird question. So, I think for most people, we know how mammals mate, and now you got me fascinated about the birds. How do birds mate? Is it like
They don't have external genitalia I mean, a couple of them do, but generally birds don't have much. Some of the waterfowl do have external genitalia, but vast majority of birds you can think of just have an opening called a cloaca. And cloaca is the common opening for the urinary system, the digestive system, and the reproductive system. It's all three. And just so you know, the word cloaca in Spanish means sewer.
God? All right, so
I don't think that's a coincidence.
no, no, all right, so the male bird has no external. So what's he doing with what's he putting in the cloaca?
They just bump. They bump their openings and sperm, and they ejaculate, but it's just sperm comes out of an opening and goes into, yeah. There are exceptions. Ducks have penises. There are some birds that have external genitalia, but the vast majority don't.
Wow. So it's just so when they're talking bumping uglies, that's essentially what birds are doing. They're basically just bumping into each other.
Yeah, and yeah, it's even an experienced birder has a hard time telling males and females apart if they're not one of the ones that have color differences. Like if you look at albatrosses, this is a classic example. Um, and in several species of albatrosses, a lot of same-sex pairing goes on. Something like 40% of the pairs that you see in some colonies are same-sex. And we had no idea about this until recently because nobody looked up their skirts. They all look identical, and so they just assumed these were all male-female pairs. And it turns out a big chunk of them are female-female. And
Wow.
and the males just tend to be unpaired. So because usually it takes a couple of years to find a mate in albatrosses. So the males hang out a lot longer because sometimes the females are like, screw these guys, we're going to pair up. And then they take turns getting pregnant. I mean, laying eggs, but
Yeah.
they still go out and have extra pair copulation, but they still roost together with another female because, you know, as long as they're taking turns getting pregnant, they both have the maternity and they care for it together and they form these partnerships. Why wouldn't they be same sex? Because the actual sex act itself, is a couple of seconds, but a partnership, can last years. And in fact, they often mate for life.
Wow. All right. Last bird thing. Are they doing it in the air or are they sitting down on a tree or something like? How does it happen?
They don't do it in the air. They don't do it in the air. Which is but albatrosses are a good example. They can fly for months straight. I mean, they can really go for a very, very long time. But no, they don't have sex in the air. They have sex generally on the land, unless they are waterfowl, and they can do it in the water as well.
Wow. All right. So this is amazing. This is how amazing humans are, Nate.
Yeah,
We can be part of the Mile High Club, but birds can't. There's
that's
something
right.
inherently wrong there.
Yeah. Well, it's funny that you use the example of the Mile High Club because one time, we were talking about humans, something that's special about human, and I always talk about human culture. That's really what makes us special is that we don't just have to go out and learn how to live. Like we inherit all of this knowledge and stuff and accumulates. And someone said, well, we have lots of things that we can't do that animals can't. We can't fly. And I was like, how'd you get here? How'd you get to this conference? Did you walk from California to this conference? Well, no, but I was like, we can fly. We absolutely can fly. For like 100 years now, we've been able to fly. And that's what I'm talking about. Like, we're not limited by what our bodies can do. That's what's so great about human culture.
That's great. All right. Last thing, and hopefully the last dumb thing I'm going to ask you is so we know for humans, we have nightclubs, bars, Tinder to tell someone that you're attracted to them. How
Mhm.
does an animal tell someone tell someone? How does an animal tell another animal they're into them? Like they don't put on, some Barry White, like humans do. What are they doing to initiate the love
So
process?
it's a great question. This is one of these things that's very different from species to species,
Okay.
but they do a lot of times advertise. So there's displays, for a gorilla, for example. I mean, that's a display. It can be a threat display, if it's another male that he's worried about, or he can also just be trying to, woo the females. There are females who advertise their fertility visually, right? So if you think of baboons are the famous example, but lots of primates have, pardon me, genital swelling, and that's what's let them go. And then, so if they want to know, they'll just kind of stick their rump up, and that says, okay, you have access now. There's a lot of wooing that goes on in birds too, where they'll build elaborate structures, and that's the enticement. It's not the male himself; it's what he can build. And fish do this too. Fish a lot of times build a lot of nests. If you think about bluegill sunfish, the most common fish in freshwater streams in North America, they build these elaborate nests, and the females come and they inspect, and they want the biggest, most centrally located nest because that way it's protected from egg predators. And that's how they judge the quality of the male. So these are all called proxy indicators, meaning they look for features. And remember, this isn't conscious, it's instinctual. but they would go after features that they think makes a good male so that their children will inherit that and be successful. So what is it about fancy coloring, that parrots have, for example? Well, the females are attracted to it because they want their sons to look like that, because then females will be attracted to their son, and so on. So the idea being, and actually walruses do this too, where they have what are called rookeries, where the males compete with each other for real estate, for space, for territory, and then they mate, and the females choose them based on the territory, and then they go back to living together. So the space wasn't necessary for survival. They don't keep living in it afterwards. The space is simply a way for the females to judge who's strongest, healthiest, has endurance, because they usually forego eating for weeks while they're during this competition. So think of it as like it's a decathlon, right? You don't do any of the sports of the decathlon to survive, but you do it to advertise your overall quality. So that's why it's a proxy indicator of overall quality. So that's generally what animals look for. And what the proxy indicator is will be different from species to species, but they look for some kind of indicator of overall health, wellness, vigor, strength. Like think of the antlers of a deer. They sometimes fight with it, but generally it's just display. It's just for the way to tell the females, look how strong I am to be able to carry this shit around. I have to carry this around for 4 months of the year. I must be pretty good if I can, that's what I mean. It's a proxy indicator.
Wow, that's so cool. Thank you for telling me that. All right, so I don't know if anyone's ever said this to you, but I get a lot of vibes of Dr. Doolittle meets Dr. Ruth with you. Like the fact that you know so much about the sex life of animals. What do your friends and family think about that? Your brain has so much information revolving around the way animals get it on.
Well, let me tell you, I have many friends who have found themselves caught in a corner while I talk to them about animal sex. Many friends who are like signaling to other people, come save me, because he's doing it again.
That's great. His name is Nathan Lents. He's the author of The Sexual Evolution. Nathan, thanks so much for your time. I really appreciate it.
I had a great time. Thank you.
And that's going to do it for this episode of Good Listen. If you enjoyed it and you're watching on YouTube, please tap that thumbs up button. It's a small gesture, but it really helps the channel. If you're watching or listening on Spotify or listening on Apple, a 5-star review would be awesome. If you'd like to connect with me, catch up on past episodes, read my blog, go to joepardavila.com. Thanks again for joining me this week. I will see you next time. Adios.